Welcome to the Ringer WNBA show. So much is happening, you guys. The Final Four is set. What a weekend. We are joined today by ESPN's Kevin Pelton. Old friend of mine. I haven't gotten to we haven't gotten to chat in a while, but used to cover a lot of NBA together. But KP has been boots on the ground for the W for a very long time, so I'm super excited to talk to him. Before we get into the games, though, huge breaking news. Olivia Miles, Notre Dame guard, enters the transfer portal, foregoing the WNBA draft. Shocker, I think, to everybody involved. We were really thinking like either she's going to enter the WNBA draft or she's going to go back to college. She threw us for a loop. This transfer portal news. KP, what's your initial reaction to all that?
Yeah, to your point, I think it was surprising that she didn't enter the WNBA draft, but it was shocking that she entered the transfer portal. And that was kind of the unprecedented nature of this, because we have seen star players who had the chance to enter the draft decide to come back for another year of eligibility before. You can go all the way back to Elena Deladon because of the fact that she had the redshirt year when she started at UConn. She could have come out after 3 years at Delaware and went back for another season as part of the 3-C draft. Sabrina Ionescu is another good example of this. She would have undoubtedly been the number one pick in the 2019 draft after a junior season when the Aces had it. It's a fascinating what if to wonder if they had drafted Sabrina instead of Jackie Young and how different WNBA history is. Mm-hmm. Certainly the WNBA finals the last couple of years, or the semifinals matchup last year with the Aces. But so there's precedent for that. What there isn't precedent for is not only am I not entering the draft, I'm not coming back to Notre Dame either. That part is the fascinating part, because it's now going to have major ramifications, not only for this year's WNBA draft and next year's, but also for the upcoming college basketball season.
Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of different splintering ramifications of this. Obviously, there were a lot of trades and free agency as well, with picks going back and forth in both of those drafts. So it kind of changes the calculus on some of those. I personally was not a huge fan of the Sparks giving up the number 2 pick to get Kelsey Plum. That's looking pretty good right now. If I'm the Los Angeles Sparks, I'm feeling pretty good about that, because the other thing with this draft is that Olivia Miles was one of the only point guards, maybe the only point guard, depending how you feel about Georgia Amor or Haley Van Lith, that really projected out to be a starter and a star. And now we're looking at this draft that is increasingly even more forward heavy. With the teams at the top kind of needing more of that guard play as well. Obviously, Paige Beckers is going to still end up going number 1, but I'm curious if you were, you have spent a lot of time around the Seattle Storm, who traded for that number 2 pick, sent Jewel Lloyd to the Las Vegas Aces, and looked like they were in perfect position to kind of not necessarily rebuild, but serve the present and the future as well by drafting Olivia Miles, and having her be part of the future with Ezzy, while also still having Nneka, still having Skylar Diggins, who is went to Guard University, has a relationship, I presume, with Olivia Miles, and is also, like, we're talking about the Seattle Storm, a great organization. I think we can definitely get into Miles' potential motivations here, but definitely just something that sends a lot of different shockwaves. And I'm just like, man, if you're Seattle, what do you do with that pick now? How are you processing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, ever since Seattle got this number 2 pick in that trade you mentioned that sent Kelsey Plum to the Sparks and Jewel Lloyd to the Aces, I've been thinking a lot about what's going to end up happening in my hometown of Seattle with the team that I watch on the most regular basis in the league. And I will tell you this. This is not something, I want to be very clear, this is definitely not something I have heard from the Storm. It is not something I have heard from anyone else. But there was just kind of something in the wind for me the last month or so where maybe Olivia Miles wasn't seen quite as highly by WNBA executives at this point as it seemed back in November and December when she started the season so well and Notre Dame was ranked number 1, where, the 3-point shooting fell off a little bit, was still a dramatic improvement over the course of the season over what we'd seen beforehand. And that was going to be really important, I think, for Seattle in particular, as you projected how she would fit playing with Skylar Diggins-Smith in the short term before, presumably being the long-term point guard of the future. And then the other aspect of this is nothing to do with Olivia Miles and everything to do with Dominique Malonga. And, that was something I posted about on Blue Sky yesterday when this news broke, is that the difference between the way that this draft is talked about when you kind of go in the media and then the way that this draft is talked about when you talk to people in the WNBA. And again, this is not a Storm thing. I got a text
Just a
yesterday.
general WNBA thing.
Yeah, I got a text yesterday from someone who works for another team in the league yesterday who said, this clears the way for Seattle to take the best player in the draft at number 2, referring to Malonga.
Wow.
And I can't get there because I just watched Paige Beckers drop 74 points in 2 games during the NCAA tournament. I think she is an amazing prospect. She is for sure the number 1 player to me. Even if Malonga might even be more talented, because you do have the question mark about her availability as a member of the French national team. We saw none of those players come over prior to the Olympics last year. They've got Eurobasket this during this WNBA season. So that's always going to be a question with Malonga that's not there with Paige Beckers or Olivia Miles or any of the American WNBA draft prospects. But people in the league are very high on Malonga's potential. She's 19 years old, contributing in the Euro Cup. Of course, had the great breakdown on the ringer of her game not too long ago. Yeah, but also the Athletic, if you looked at their piece last week, Sabrina Merchant and Ben Pickman talked to a variety of league executives anonymously, and again, very high. And I think someone in that piece as well suggested that she might be the best long-term prospect in this draft.
Yeah, Mark Schindler wrote a great piece for us at The Ringer on Dominique Malonga. For the uninitiated, this is maybe not the most nuanced comparison, but French Victor Wembanyama female Victor Wembanyama is a comparison that comes up a lot. And obviously time will tell if she ends up being that type of player, but just incredibly promising. And I, for one, welcome our future with Ezzy and Dominique as just the Twin Towers lording over the rest of the WNBA in about five or 6 years. If I'm the Seattle Storm, I want to go in that direction. Yeah, and you're right. It creates a bit of a permission structure, right? Because I think there were a lot of fans that would just be like, hey, why aren't you taking Olivia? But to the point of WNBA scouts and executives souring on Olivia a little bit, that's really interesting to me, because I do wonder if that has something to do with her decision, whether she really thought that maybe she would drop from the number 2 pick to something lower. I don't think she would have dropped too far, but we have seen recently, whether it's a 3-point shooting dropping off, her struggling with the physicality of teams like NC State, where she just hasn't been able to get downhill the same way. And also, I think the biggest thing is just Nia Ivy turning way more into offense-defense substitutions with Olivia Miles, especially against particular, guard-heavy matchups. Like we saw it against TCU, where because of their size and because of Haley Van Lith's ability to put downhill pressure on a team, Olivia Miles, who was also, by the way, dealing with a sprained ankle, but defense has just been, it's been the biggest question for her, especially one-on-one, being able to stay in front of her matchup. Ivy went with Cassandra Prosper, shout out Canada, quite a bit, as opposed to Olivia Miles in that game, and also I think to Notre Dame's success as well. So that's certainly an aspect of her game that she needs to work on. And it also kind of gets into some different splintering off points here, where you start to ask yourself the question of was there potentially something brewing in the Notre Dame locker room? It's something that certainly people have been speculating about, especially after they had their loss to Duke, where they didn't come out of the locker room for an hour. There was an earlier loss where the same thing sort of happened. And now you have obviously the Olivia Miles news. And then the Olivia side of it too, I thought it was really interesting what she said about feeling like she's maybe outgrown college in her final press conference. This might actually, depending on where she ends up going, depending on if she just entered the transfer portal, she could go back, right? Depending on if she does end up going somewhere else, she might be able to find a sort of perfect medium where she's not necessarily, playing next to another high usage point guard in Hannah Hidalgo. Olivia Miles' usage was pretty low for a player of her caliber. I believe it was around the 22, 24 range. And I think that maybe she wants to go somewhere where you can get it up to where she's a primary ball handler, get it up to like 28, 29%, and really be like that pick and roll threat. Potentially even for a school like TCU. They are definitely somebody who came to mind, especially as sort of being like a WNBA university, with the amount of spread pick and roll they run, just like the high level of actions and sets, and what Mark Campbell is trying to do there, they feel like a good option for her. And then you can declare for the draft in 2026 with a new CBA, get that transfer portal money and also get that cap spike money at the same time. So I can see it from Olivia, even if I guess I'm still trying to reconcile the Notre Dame part of it. Like, I get that there's a lot of money to be made in the NIL now, especially with revenue sharing, but it still does feel like a surprise, because despite what I just said, her and Hannah Hidalgo, big question coming into the season whether they'd fit together, have fit incredibly well together. So it's still, even as I look for justifications, I still have questions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say is this goes back a year ago when there was a lot of talk. In that case, it was about, will Hannah Hidalgo potentially transfer with Olivia Miles coming back from the ACL injury that sidelined her during Hidalgo's terrific freshman year. And as you said, instead, they both stayed. They thrived for, a great portion of this season. The team thrived for a great portion of the season. I think they both thrived throughout it. And, then all of a sudden, like later in the year, we started to hear these questions about the chemistry, as you alluded to. And, the fact that they went out the way they did, I think, probably has to be a factor in Olivia Miles' decision. And, it's interesting because the way that she was playing for Notre Dame this year was very useful for Seattle in terms of scouting her, given that she'd be coming in to play with Skylar Diggins-Smith in a similar sort of situation where she was going to be off the ball, presumably early in her career, especially because she has developed as a shooter. If you think about other teams that are scouting her, they're probably doing it primarily as a lead ball handler and didn't get to see her as much in that role this season. And to the 2CU point specifically, since that rumor sort of immediately popped up, well, look at what Haley Van Lith did to her draft stock over the last year. I still think it's probably not as high as, maybe fans who just tune into the NCAA tournament might think, because of the fact that, she's older, she's not a pure point guard, she's still more of a scorer first, all of those elements. But when you compare where Haley Van Lith, kind of where the discussion was about her this time a year ago before she transferred to TCU and where it is now, it is night and day. And, if Olivia Miles, she's not in the night portion of it, her stock is not down to that degree. But if she can lift it the same way that Haley Van Lith did, I think it's plausible she could even be the number one pick in the 2026 draft.
I mean, that would be huge. I think it is. I think it'd be a tougher draft, though. There's nothing tougher than supplanting Paige Beckers, but it just feels like with Lauren Betts, potentially Flau'jae Johnson, that draft, especially like at least at the top, it does feel like it would be hard to get to that place. But it might not matter. The money might just be to a level where, being even the number 6 pick in the WNBA draft is better than being the number 2 pick in the 2025 draft, right? So, I mean, we'll see with all of that. I'm really curious to see what happens. Are there any teams that you want to see her go to?
I mean, I think it would be honestly quite fascinating to see her go to UConn. It doesn't seem like it's a fit, but stepping into Paige Becker's role, I think would be a fascinating to see that play out. You did mention Flau'jae Johnson in 2026, and we should mention, look, this may be outdated by the time the podcast actually comes out, because as we're recording, she has a few hours to declare before for players who were still active as of Sunday. The players who were eliminated before Sunday, they had to declare by yesterday for the WNBA draft. For everyone who continued playing, they have until 48 hours after their team's last game. So LSU was eliminated on Sunday afternoon. That gives Flau'jae until Sunday afternoon Pacific time, Sunday afternoon Eastern. That's the 48-hour clock for Flau'jae when that starts. And I was in there with in the locker room with our Alexa Philippou when she asked about her future, and Flau'jae certainly didn't say she was entering the draft, but she also didn't rule it out, just said, I don't know, and I have to talk to my family and Coach Mulkey before making that decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. She might actually clear the way for 2026 to be the Olivia Miles draft. We'll definitely have to see about that.